Hi, everybody. Welcome to DomainSherpa. And as always, thanks for tuning in to the podcast with the best domain name and digital asset content in the world. Today's episode is the Sherpa Short, co-hosted by Chris Zuiker, Matthew Zuiker, and myself, where we pick one or two topics and we dig into them for a bit. This piggybacks off of some of the blogs that Chris posts on LinkedIn to provide some useful insight to all of you from the perspective of one of the most successful domain brokers in the world and another guy who is in the early stages of that same journey. And on today's show, we talk about understanding the mentality of end-user buyers and how to help them appreciate the value of premium domains. We talk about the difference between their worldview and their self-view, and also how a domain can reflect status versus vanity for an end-user business. We also touch a little bit on the different buyer types for domains, which Chris goes into more detail about in his most recent book, Domain Name Broker Secrets. So definitely check that out. We also go into a small list of domains coming up for auction on NameJet to see what the guys think are interesting or not, including domains like vintagebike.com, skinplus.com, temporaryoffice.com, and puresoul.com. And remember, if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, you can also watch the video version at DomainSherpa.com and on our YouTube channel at ds.tv. You can also check us out on Apple and Spotify and other podcast platforms as well. And as usual, big shout out to Dan.com, the number one place in the world to buy and sell your domains with a special platform made for domain investors. With that, it's now time to get into this segment of Sherpa Shorts here on Domain Sherpa, where all roads lead to domains. What's up, Sherpa Network? Thank you for tuning in today. My name is Jonathan Tenenbaum, a.k.a. JT, a.k.a. Jay On, a.k.a. Sherpa Winfrey, John Burgundy, all that good stuff. And I'm the host and producer of Domain Sherpa, where all roads lead to domains. Today's show is a show that we've done before. It is called Sherpa Short or Sherpa Snap, Sherpa Snack, Sherpa Segments. I don't know, like the branding department's still kind of working on this. But the ultimate goal here is to feature Chris and Matthew, and I'll do more robust introductions here in a second, but it's really to feature them, bring them on the show, and deliver some cool content for folks to understand different aspects and angles and insights into the domain industry with two of the biggest, best brokers in the world. So that's where we focus on the domain space through the lens really more of end user acquisitions and upgrades, and again getting the perspective of some of the best in the biz, with their unique insight and knowledge of the industry to really help y'all out there that are watching and listening to the show. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce to my right. I got my boy Matthew Zuiker, aka the Kid, aka Zyke1, aka Matlock, aka the first of his name. He's hanging out here. He is the young gun in the room, Chris's son. He is a junior broker here with MediaOptions. Started his journey in the domain world working with Chris on Chris's blog and his podcast, and then has since come on board full time with MediaOptions, and is really just we're talking tens of thousands of leads and lead gen, multiple domain acquisitions and sales, literally closing deals every week now, which is pretty awesome, which is good for me too. So thank you. You know what I'm saying? Let me just express my gratitude.
You're welcome, JD.
And specializing, like I said, lead gen and tracking down hard to find domain owners for acquisitions, and also working on the sell side too. So you've come a long way, baby. You know what I'm saying? And it's good to see it. And welcome back on the show.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
All right, that's what's up. And then let me introduce quickly below us, my boy Chris Zuiker, aka Zuiker's Island, aka World War Z, aka the Brand Whisperer, aka Zyke Tyson. You feel me? Yo. Lead broker, senior domain broker. Head of sales. He is that guy, 20 years sales marketing experience, one of the best domain brokers in the world. We get that award every year at escrow.com where we're named the top broker, and it's, Drew is the one that's named as an individual, but it could just as easily. There have been years where we could have had 1 and 2 between you and Drew, and, you're kind of interchangeable at this point, with respect to those accolades and everything else. And literally, arguably the best in the biz. Nobody talks to more high level decision makers at big companies on a daily, weekly basis than Chris. And, which obviously provides us with some pretty awesome, unique insight and first-person perspective into the people that are making stuff happen out there, man. So what's up, man? Plus, you got your own podcast, you got books.
My favorite line is I'll tell someone, it's like, listen, I talk to billionaires, millionaires, thousandaires, and hundredaires. You know, they're like just that perspective. Like, hold on a second, hundredaire, billionaire.
Yeah, no, hey man.
And I say, I talk to the best marketers in the world and the worst marketers in the world. But I've got you on the phone right now, and you're probably one of the best. So let's talk. Let's talk about this.
Yeah, baby, you're one of the top. You're the best one I've talked to today. But I think that is also a really cool part, and I should probably add that into your intro piece as well. It's the range of folks that you speak to. I mean, it's one of the beautiful things about the domain business, and we say it on the show. All roads lead to domains, and domains touch everything. So, when you're talking to companies and potential domain buyers, domain sellers, you're really running the entire gamut of, individual self-starting entrepreneurs to publicly traded companies and, trying to get a hold of the right decision maker at those organizations. Working with some of the biggest, companies literally in the world. Like you look at the top, we're not even talking Fortune 100. We're talking like Fortune 5, not Fortune 500, literally Fortune 5.
Right.
And so it's good stuff, man. Well, like I'm telling the audience, look, the reason we're here is bringing these guys in. We like to, Chris already does a lot of podcasting stuff and some video stuff, but, trying to tie that in more to DomainSherpa, the flagship, what we do. And really for me, it's just fun because it's like, oh, this is what I get to do for work. Like, I mean, who's working? Who's working?
That's what I say too. Is like, listen, I like thoroughly enjoy. I don't feel like I work. I enjoy what I do. I mean, it's literally, we talk to the coolest people. It's strategy, actually the worst people too, but it's strategy, right? It's this intersection, it's everything. It's negotiating. It's everything.
Yeah.
And you hear these different perspectives. I mean, kind of this conversation, there was we're done three things as we were talking. So one was like self-view. It's like, why don't they buy? Right. So when I came into the domain space 8 years ago or 9 years ago, crazy, time flies. But I made the conscious decision not to focus on the wholesale market. I wanted to focus on the end user market, because if I could figure out why they buy, then I would actually be able to help wholesales and buy domains. 100%. So it was self-view. The other one is a story. I've got a story with that one. The second one is passing on the perfect offer. And, I've got a little story there on that one. And then the third one is kind of 5 buyer types. I think you sent that link to me, JT.
Yeah. Well, I definitely would love to cover the buyer types, and whether we do that on today's show or on the next one or whatever, it's all good. I like this idea of self-view though, because I know that's something that you mentioned even before we jumped on, because you were saying how, one thing you were like, what I've really got on my mind is this, idea of self-view. And, we were talking anecdotally about a deal we were working on recently where we had a very, very big name that we were selling. And, we had what we thought was the perfect buyer and had a very productive dialogue going with them. They ultimately passed, and then someone else came in and ended up buying the name. So it's, and then they lost out on this opportunity. Right. And, and I think that one stuck with you a bit because it did really seem like, and we can't name the name, but, it was a big one. And it's interesting because I think the folks who ended up with it, I think they're going to do really good things with it. But I think that the folks who passed on it probably, were even.
Well, I wanted them to win. I wanted them because how I viewed it, because I just did a podcast on this, and obviously we don't say the domain names because it's not right, and we don't want to. But there's let's say there's different momentum, different industries, and different markets. This was a category, defining domain name, and this company was in the mindset to dominate this industry, and they were consolidating. But it was interesting because they had a very underdog mentality, right? Like, hey, we built this thing up and we're grassroots, and it's like this underdog mentality versus mentality of a global leader, like someone who's saying, hey, no, we're going to lead and own this industry. Okay, so there's these two competing different mindsets. Okay, so stick with this for a second. Now, my view of sales comes from Garrett White, who comes from, who knows, maybe Jordan Belfort. Jordan Belfort has a straight line in Uranus and Pluto. Don't go down.
Is he the Wolf of Wall Street? Is that him?
Yeah.
I mean, awesome. Love his training. Read his book 4 times. Did training from early on. So it's this thought of worldview, self-view, roadmap, right? So the first thing when you sell a domain name or say any products, the worldview has to align. And that worldview specifically to domain names is, hey, I realize I'm at risk with my domain name. There's a risk and opportunity for me to own the raw version of my name, right? That's my worldview, okay? It's the biggest risk and opportunity, okay? Because we do this day in, day out. We have the 7 dimensions and we understand this. And then the opposite to that worldview is, hey, Chris, we're okay. We're okay with my try, get, LC Inc., who knows what the hell, freaking 3 letters,
.net, a .co, right? I mean,
Bloom with 3 O's, I'm like, dude, listen, man, just buy freaking bloom.com, please. Like, I'm telling you, I don't know what you're smoking, what's in your tea this morning, but like, it just don't work, it's not going to work that long having 3 O's. So
lose the extra O.
So worldview is like, hey, I don't need this. We're okay. We got ROI today. We don't really need this. That would be vanity. Okay. This is this conversation. Oh, it's vanity. And that's what I come back with. No, it's status, not vanity. Not vanity. There's a massive difference. Okay. Status is about trust and leadership and opening doors, and your consumers seeing you as elite. Okay. Or vanity is just, is the opposite of that, right? It's like you're vain, right? There's nothing behind it backing it up other than like hot air. Okay. And so status is why you want to buy one reason why you want to buy the raw version of your brand. Okay. So this is worldview. Okay. Now it's easy because worldview sometimes can align. In this case, like in the sale here, or this negotiation, this talk, it aligned. Like they saw it. Hey, that's a great domain name. I like it. Right. But I think what really kept them back was self-view. Now, this company does millions of dollars in marketing. Okay. 3 million in marketing spend a month. Okay. Maybe plus, right? Depending upon the season. So they're spending quite a bit of time. Can you guys see me?
Yeah.
Okay, you look frozen for a second. Okay,
no, we're good. We're just enthralled with what you're saying, because a couple of things real quick, and hold your place, don't forget. But I think that's some really interesting stuff, and these are the kind of nuggets that I like to put out there in the universe, because I think it's important for people to this is the value, right? Is that the difference between status and vanity, and for it's sort of a must-have or versus a nice-to-have kind of thing, and and I think it is important for folks to draw that distinction and understand the mindset of who you're talking to when you're trying to sell, because that's something we get all the time, where people will say, hey, just how do you negotiate and communicate with a big organization, right? That's like a big global company, or, a billionaire, how does that work? How do you, because I think some folks, especially smaller domain investors and, folks that exist more in the investor or wholesale side, it's like their ultimate goal is to try to get to these end users that we talk to on like literally like a daily basis, right? And and I think that some of that kind of stuff is some of the secret sauce, right? And it's that worldview piece, and then dividing the difference between the need for the domain and how important is it for them to have it, and and the difference between status and vanity. And I love that distinction, because I think it's really poignant, and it's so true. It's that, what point is it that your business doesn't really need it, but it would be good to have it or nice to have it, right? And that's the vanity side, where, like you said, behind it, there's not really a ton of value. It's just, it's just another thing, like jewelry or something, versus status, which is owning it really puts you, in the mind of consumers and visitors and folks on the internet, knowing, and well, actually just in global commerce in general, just knowing that, hey, you own that term, that word, that brand is all you, and it's not some variation of it, kind of like what you said, which you sort of flew through it, but it's all the like, hey, the oneword.com like thing that defines us and our brand, and we own it in the minds of everybody in the universe. Instead, we're going to go with a get blank or try blank, or blank.net or blank.co, and and ultimately something that is a second, third, fourth choice, and and it comes with all the trappings of that. But go ahead. So you were saying,
Matthew, you want to jump in?
Yeah. So I was going to say, yeah, I think that's like a great point, that vanity versus status, because your domain isn't like a vanity plate that you're hoping that the one guy stuck behind you, Travis, is gonna see and laugh at. It's like everybody in the world is seeing your domain, and so that says a lot about who you are in the industry, dominating that market space. And yeah, it's not that vanity plate. This is like a real deal, real asset that everybody in the world, that you're trying to direct everybody in the world to look at. When you buy one of these category defining domains, you're putting all your marketing, all your traffic at that for everybody to see, not just the one guy stuck behind you in traffic. So yeah, I think that's a really cool point.
Yeah, it creates a simple and effortless path for your customers to interact with you, which leads to conversion, which leads to trust, which leads to this thing we call brand equity, right? Brand equity being all that and captured. And you think status is like, okay, there's Grant Cardone DMs you, or Grant, something, who knows, Grant Smith DMs you, right? You're like, hey, okay, freaking, there's a difference here, right? Freaking Grant Cardone, not that he's ever texted me. Actually, one guy I have not gotten a hold of, but that's status, right? So it's like status as you go into the meeting, and immediately the VCs and the private equity are like, okay, they understand marketing. They're serious about what they're building because they have captured the raw essence of it, right? It immediately elevates them, not because it's just the domain. You're like, oh, it's cool, it's one word. No, because it signals that you believe in what you're building, okay? And that's this next thing called self-view, right? It's this belief in yourself and belief in what you're building. And many times founders don't believe in it. Like, they're looking for the quick exit, right? They're looking for the quick turnaround. They're looking just to sell this puppy and get rid of it and move on, right? You think about, actually, I was saying in my podcast this morning, it's like how many companies went to the graveyard at Yahoo, AOL, Amazon, IBM, these tech startups that were doing something in business, and then they get acquired, and then the next thing you know, they are, they're out of business, right? They just like IBM didn't move forward with them. Hey, is my video lagging?
No, you're good.
Okay.
It's, so real quick, there's the movie Being John Malkovich, where the guy, he's talking, the one character, and he's like speaking perfect English. He's like, I'm sorry that my accent is so crazy and I'm so hard to understand. And they're like, no, I totally can understand. Like, you're absolutely. He's like, no, it's okay. Thanks for being nice about it, but I know I'm really hard to understand. But it's like you and your video there. Like, no, it's all good.
Oh, but, that's hilarious.
Anyway, so keep going about on the self-view piece.
Yeah. So that's self-view, right? So there's worldview, there's self-view, and then the roadmap is the ability to make it just effortless for them to buy. Okay, having it through escrow.com, having it on a platform that they can just hit the buy now button and buy it, right? Depending upon the buyer, the buyer type, you need to make it super simple. So in this case, one of the things we did to like alleviate that self-view is provide examples for them and show them kind of, hey, what you can do, as well as make it like so super like simple and like free, right? So when you think about a domain name, if you can buy it right, especially if a company can lease a domain, it's practically free. Okay, if not free, from maybe the first month. Okay, depending upon how they use it, depending upon how they deploy it. But in this case, like the lease option with the amount down and the monthly payments, with a term of like 5 years, I mean, it would have been free for them. Like, it would have been free. Now their stated goal with the founder, this charismatic founder, was like, hey, we're going to take over this space and we're going to own it, and that's my vision, and we're going to own it. And yet, it's interesting because when the opportunity came about for him to own it, they didn't step up. I mean, when it's presented to them in this free manner, now that's okay. Okay. It's like, I understand that in sales because we talk to, and it's really the self view. And I think it was really like the underdog view versus like, hey, considering yourself as the elite. I think he was just stuck in this underdog mentality. Hey, I'm the underdog. We're coming and we're doing all this stuff. And, here's how I run things. But it was even, I saw it was even incongruent with the way that they didn't respond back to me, right? So in their culture, like responding back in same day service and a call back and all this stuff was very important. And yet their senior leadership didn't have that ability to just say, hey, either we're passing or we're going forward. They just ignored it. I thought that was interesting, right? So all these things that come into self-view. Now, I think over time they would have seen it. We probably would have doubled the price on them, and they probably would have bought it later on. I mean, we've had that happen. We've done that before, where we've literally doubled the price, and they've done that. But then you contrast that with the person who bought it, and this person, hey, their self-view was, their worldview and self-view was one that, hey, like we've done this many times before. Like, this is an asset. We're going to come in. We're going to dominate. Like, they have no doubt they're going to dominate. They have no doubt their ability to get this exit, and they didn't hesitate. Right? They didn't hesitate to take it down, especially when it was as simple and like, like the terms were such that it was simple, right? So they didn't test it down. So this self view is very important, and the best thing that can happen when we're selling is that it happens outside of us with the VC and the PEs. Like we get it on the radar, they start this discussion with their team, and they go through all this stuff internally, okay, along with some resources we provide for them and conversation we provide for them to get them over the edge. But
yeah, well, and real quick, and that's a really interesting point too. So talking first about, so the self view of a company is important, and a company is made up of individuals, right? And so you're trying to, it's also important to understand too the dynamic there. We talk about getting to the right person at these organizations, because it's one thing to just get a hold of somebody in the company, but you really need to figure out, okay, it's almost like when we do this all the time, because with a lot of the companies that we work with, whether they're companies we have relationships with or we establish relationships, we end up in dialogue with multiple people there to sort of figure out who's who and what's what, so that you can really understand who's the evangelist in the room, right? And who can make something happen here, or who gets what it is that we are selling and how important it is to them. Because it's almost like what we're doing is almost consultative, especially with the larger organizations, and it requires multiple conversations with multiple folks to figure out who's who, what's what, and who through their prior experience or just what they know about things and what their role is within the organization, is in a position to either be really pushing for it. And sometimes it's as simple as, hey, more often than not, CTOs are a little bit hesitant, because for them rebranding to a new domain name is more work than it is, whereas the marketing folks usually are more, sort of, I don't want to say pliable, because it's not that necessarily. It's just they get it, right? They're the ones that are like, oh, give me this amazing new thing that I can then go, like this toy or this tool, this weapon that I can go and deploy, and go make us more money, go get more sales, build our brand identity, build our brand equity, all that kind of stuff. So, but then, like you said too, then there's sort of this overarching feeling of and perception of where they are and how they got there. And, and some of that will then dictate where they are as far as taking risks, spending the money, making some of those key decisions that you need to when you're talking about doing something like changing, or taking the plunge on the big domain, and, I find it interesting on that one particularly too, though, because, there were conversations with a couple of the folks related to the lease options, and to your point, if you're spending millions of dollars a month on online advertising, and you can get the domain for a fraction of that, and you don't do it, it's like, well, what are you like? What would get them over the hump? It just has to be more just what leads them to that aha moment, and
well, and I was, is like, look at this domain, look at your domain, just do a quick survey, and like you'll quickly see that right off the trust is massively here. You have to work and continue to invest, and that trust is here. And that's what you're buying with the domain. You're buying momentum. You're buying the goodwill. Like you're buying, sometimes you're capturing that forward for several years, right? Might take you a couple of years to get the ROI back. Sometimes it's a year, right? Ring.com, it was a year, but you're buying that momentum. You're buying that trust that's already captured in that keyword. And so that's why domains cost money. Okay. Because you're capturing that, you're owning that, you're deploying that, and then you're transferring that over to the products that in your brand. Now it's interesting. Okay. So you said, kind of the second topic though, in a sense, like the self-views, like, so Matthew and I were going to buy a domain, for acquired domain. Don't tell him the domain, Matthew. Okay. But,
I don't know right now.
Or Billy can erase it.
Domains are going to need more info.
But, once again, is like we got with, 3 different people, and, the marketing manager came back and said, so it was a domain they're not using. They bought it through an acquisition, acquiring different, just the similar thing that happens.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And they came back and said, not interested. Don't ever email me again. You scum, pond scum, whatever, right? Like, just go off.
Stop spamming me. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, okay, I want to give you money, but I got it. You don't know who we are. So it makes sense. But then, the CEO came back and said, hey, here's what it would take to close. And so, yeah, exactly. Who you get in front, right? The self view, even if you flip it over on the acquisition side, Some people, and I saw this in corporate America, are just miserable. They just, there's a couple, as Anthony Robbins said, there's two miserable people in the world, and they just seem to like relocate everywhere.
Oh, really? Okay. I like that.
He had one of his comments back in the day. But,
Yeah.
their incentive, they have zero incentive to think about the company. They're thinking about the box that they're in, their job. And when you present them with an opportunity, they cannot handle it. And so you have to get with the right person, right? This self-view of someone who cares about the company, has an open mind, both on the buy side and the sell side.
That's a really interesting point too, because it's like, when you talk about the different people and this goes back to what I was saying, like, a CTO is less likely to want to acquire a new domain because when they look at what their job is and what their duties are, and something that's just going to be more work, unless they're truly bought in that particular organization, and who knows what their compensation structure looks like, but you hope that they're incentivized to see success for their business and that they recognize the need or the, sort of the benefit that they would get. And on the flip side, you have the same situation when you talk about getting a company to sell a domain. You got to folks on the marketing side who recognize more often than again, the value of the brand value in domains, right? So, to them, even if it's something they're not using, they're going to kind of clutch it and say, nope, we're good. What they don't realize is that, oh, hey, they actually don't have a need for that. They're not, that's a nice to have. It's a vanity piece at that point for them. And kind of to Matthew's point, which I thought was great about the vanity aspect, is that a vanity license plate is really intended for the 20 people you're going to drive past. And depending how fast you drive, maybe it's more. If you drive as fast as Matthew drives, more people will see your plate in the rear view for a split second, before it takes off down the road. But the, and it's true. Like the vanity piece is like, the audience is small and it really is pretty relevant. And, whereas, the actual cash flow that can come in, that can then be utilized for other things that are more important to the mission of the company. Which is why then you get the CEO actually has the bigger holistic view of the business and says, hey, I'm not in this box that some of the other folks are stuck in, where they don't see the bigger picture as to what was really beneficial and what's really needed. And so, yeah, man, all that stuff about educating and changing people and breaking people's worldviews and finding the right people and getting them to understand the right stuff, such a key piece of all of this. And this key piece is trying to sell anything that's, that's going to be helpful for a company. So
that's why Drew is he's the master. What, Matthew?
No, you go first. You go first.
I want to say Drew's the master. It's like, we got to publish like the Drew's, the Drew diaries or something. I don't know what we call it,
The Drew email of the week.
Like his emails where it's like, you're an idiot. What are you thinking? I love you. You need this anyway. It's like he literally intuitively takes you on this journey of like self-discovery and this journey of like, self-view. It's like,
yeah. Well, and part of it with him, I've also noticed
he's a natural.
Well, and it's because we also own a lot of domains. So we're buying, selling our own domains. We've been through this. We understand, and we've sold and bought and helped folks buy and sell domains. And so many of them, and he knows so much about a lot, right? He's a guy who knows a lot about a lot. And, so when he's talking to these folks, and it's like his confidence could not be higher, right? And in the belief in what he is saying is, literally maxed out. So it's like, and then and beyond that, he's kind of like, and look, if you don't want to do this and you don't want to help yourself here, then I don't know what to tell you. We're moving on. Like it is what it's kind of like this situation that we're referring to. It's like, the company, again, that if you would have asked me, I would have said, that's the right buyer. They need this domain. And then they ultimately, they delayed too long and they missed the opportunity. We say off the market forever, right? It's now off the market forever. And, the other folks that, were kind of more of a dark horse. I was like, oh, and I'm like, it works for them too. I mean, that's the other thing too, that these big companies that are really try to brand around generic terms need to understand as well. It's like, hey, look, like, the idea here is to own this brand to the exclusion of all the others who are out there using the same brand. I mean, that's the whole reason you got to pay to play and you got to commit and spend the money, is because if you don't, there are, 30, 40 other companies that are out there trying to brand with that same term and own that brand. And at some point someone's going to step up, and when they do, they're going to win. And and then obviously it's up to the their business to to succeed, but that is going to go beyond just the domain, but they give themselves a much greater head start, and then whereas everyone else then has to continue to sort of keep fighting against all the other things, which is continuing to stay, earn the mind share, and also too, then you're not even to talk about all the different, like the email leakage and the security risks and all the other stuff that comes when you don't have the domain. Anyway, but yeah,
I call it the 7 dimensions. You can go to DomainNameBrokersSecrets.com, redirects to my site. Soon, actually, we got to get that on MediaOptions, my 2 books.
Yeah, 100%. Actually, it's funny. I made a note before when I was doing the intro that I should reference the fact that you're an author. You've written 2 books about domain names, and including .com secrets, right? And that, or is it .com secrets, .com strategies? What's the
.com strategies?
.com strategies. I should know that. I've read the book, but the I'm like, what is it? Of mice and people,
mice and
like just getting like the stories, like the titles of famous books. The Hunt for Red November. Anyway, but yeah. So anyway, I know we're kind of,
but I'll say what we're pointing. That's the reason why I wrote, Domain Name Broker Secrets, right? The 7 dimensions, talking about the 7 dimensions, is because it explains why a company needs this. And literally, this is over 2 years. It took me 2 years to write it, although it's not very big, but it's impactful because as a domain investor, you're selling a domain name or you're buying a domain name, you can look at these dimensions and say, yeah, that's where it impacts me. That's why we need it. That's our risk. That's our opportunity. And there wasn't something out there before that had all this information, right? Global positioning, industry positioning, right? Even the ROI, how do you look at this, right? You look at it as like selling, acquiring one salesperson. Would this produce as much value as one salesperson? Well, of course it would. In many instances, it's like 10 salespeople, and then it, over and over and over again. And so, so that, DomainNameBrokerSecrets.com, check it out. It's 7 dimensions. And let's see that. There's my first book.
Boom.
Yeah, there's the second one.
Domain Name Broker Secrets, baby.
So check it out.
MediaOptions is the industry's leading domain broker specializing in domain acquisitions, high-value domain sales, and domain name consultation. As pioneers and thought leaders on the subject of the domain aftermarket and domain name value, plus through their clear domain acquisition service, MediaOptions offers startups and established corporations an unparalleled scope of high-value domain options, providing access to domain names and curation technologies not available elsewhere. MediaOptions believes in the power of a great domain name and is dedicated to helping you obtain yours. Call or email today to put a domain to work for you.
Okay, you're saying, Jason? Or Matthew?
I mean, my question was, man, it's so hard being on this panel because every time that I listen to you guys because have such good information, I'm like, I've got a really good idea. I'm gonna wait for a gap. I'm gonna wait for a pause, and there's no pause. So I'm gonna start cutting in. But we've been talking about that self view and kind of gloss over the buyer types because that kind of plays in that self view from what Chris was saying as far as they were still in that underdog mentality. We've raised that problem. So the question is, how do you help guide them? Obviously in this case, it didn't happen. It got taken off the market before they could, finish being guided into that final tier of buyer. But what's the process for guiding them into that tier, bringing them out of that underdog stage, bringing them out of that buyer type and into that buyer type where they do see that that's an asset, not a vanity plate?
Yeah, well, self-view is really your peers, right? So that's where testimonials come in. So that, you see products with testimonials, like the plunge pool I bought, right? I mean, I looked at the testimonials. Oh, it's amazing. I love it. Best thing, right? And so that instills, hey, if they can do it, I can do it, right? So these stories that we have about other founders, as well as, the information that we have, like this podcast, my book, the video on my YouTube channel, the first video, right? These things to help instill that so they can see that. And it takes time. You can't strong arm a big sale. They have to want it.
Well, and that's another piece that just comes into timeline. When we talk to our clients and they're like, how long will it take for me to sell my domain? And it's like, well, how much are you trying to sell the domain for based on, if you're trying to get 100% of the value that we think that it's worth, then, it'll take months. If you're trying to, if you're willing to accept, 60% of the value, then sure, we can sell it much more quickly. And if you're willing to sell it cheap enough, then, the wholesale buyers and other domain investors even become an option.
Right.
And it's like, but yeah, and I think that's one of the things that people don't realize about the sales process to do the outbound work that we do. None of this is like, oh, hey, it's just a matter of getting a hold of so-and-so. And then, they're like, yeah, I'm in, it's like, you're talking about long-term, sort of relationship building, education, and worldview breaking and shaping, really, to just, get people over the hump when they need to, if they just don't otherwise get it, and, when they get there, it's a beautiful thing.
One sentence may not sell a domain, but one sentence can certainly kill a domain sale.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. Well,
I like that.
That's that's a great point too. I mean, and that's why caution. Well, that's another thing too, where people are like, oh, hey, I'm going to go try and do this. And if I'm unsuccessful, then I'll give you guys a call. Right. We get that sometimes. And it's like, okay, but just so like,
so here's an example. So I had someone call me up and they had like these domains and another broker called them up and they were acting like they were representing a buyer making a legitimate offer, And so they go to the guy and they're like, hey, see you on this domain name. We've got a buyer for it. The perfect buyer. What are you looking for? 5 figures, 6 figures, 7 figures. Now think about that, right? The guy's like, oh, 7 figures. Wow. They view this maybe as a 7-figure domain sale, like, just let me know what you want. We'll take it back to the buyer. Is it 5, 6, 7 figures, and so immediately his mind starts going and saying, well, maybe I'm sitting on a 7-figure domain name. Maybe they really want this, right? Like maybe I should ask $1 million. And I'm like, when he got on the phone with me, I'm like, listen, it's 5 figures, man. I'm sorry. Like, I don't know. Like the way that this other broker was talking, they clearly 100% were not representing a buyer because that would be the stupidest thing to do if you have an offer.
Oh, yeah. Well, like from a heuristic standpoint, that's anchoring, right? You're anchoring their mind into like, oh, hey, this domain is a 7-figure domain, even though it's clearly not, so.
Yeah, no, clearly was not like they're never, but also they didn't even have a buyer. Like that signal to me, like, listen, they don't like, they're not representing one. They're just fishing to get a price from you to then take it back to somebody else to try to be the man in the middle.
Right. And one of the things that they probably didn't do, which is, one of the things that we do, which is, and this goes to the whole thing we said about the buyer types, like recognize who is your end user buyer. Like, cause even if you get a price, right? If you don't have, if your best buyer type that's available for a particular domain based on who's out there in the universe, for the domain is a hobbyist, right? Which we kind of say is like, they're spending, what's a hobbyist's budget? $10 to $100 or something?
Well, I mean, a hobbyist, was really like the 2,000 to 3,000, right?
So it's like if that's not, so when you start pushing, you convince a seller to give you a number and you almost guide them to give you $1 million number. It's like, and the buyers are just simply aren't out there. Then it's like, what a waste of time all that is. So,
yeah, yep.
So, but
that's interesting.
Yeah, and I actually think we'll save the buyer type discussion to really get into the different groups for the next time that we talk, because we're going to keep this one pretty short today. But as we try to do, since it's called a Sherpa short, and I think we've covered a lot of ground, just really breaking down the difference between worldview, self-view, status versus vanity. I think that's all good stuff that we've, already hit them with. So, I think we're kind of good. And unless there's anything else that you guys want to mention or talk about, I mean, we have a couple of NameJet names. I sent that list around. I didn't know if there was anything on that list that you guys thought was interesting, worth talking about as a name that, would be something that you think, could have some legs to go try to find an end user buyer for, or something like that.
I mean, like, I don't know. I like vintage bike. I mean, it's crazy how expensive bikes are,
Yeah. Well, let's do this. Let's each take 2 or 3 names and let's start with that one. So, but I think vintage bike is a pretty cool name. I know you guys don't typically play in the wholesale space, right? Because obviously, our business and for you guys. This is also why I thought it'd be interesting to bring up. First of all, shout out to NameJet, sponsor on the show. You know what I mean? And we typically on the Domain Sherpa reviews will go over a NameJet list, which will release the couple of names that we've put out on the board today, and any that we don't cover, it's fine. We'll do in the next show. But the for you guys who are really out there taking names that, come across and get into our broker list or are in the portfolio that we're outbounding on. But yeah, I think vintage bike is one that to me stood out because I think it is the kind of thing where, you could have, how expensive bikes have become. I think, you do have sort of like a retro, and I think if you do, and some of it too, if you do the Google search to see like vintage bike, like how, what pops up, you know what I mean? And you get all these like different, you actually have a bike company called Vintage Electric Bikes. So it's like,
yeah,
there you go.
There's a few.
Well, I look at, so like, look at the buyer types, or the hobbyist, then you have the self, the solo entrepreneur / local, right? And it's interesting how many, we talked to some really cool people. Like they take a domain like that and they're not an investor. They're going to build out a blog on it and then keep going. AI makes it super easy. Phrase makes it super easy. ChatGPT, right? And next thing you know, they've got traffic coming in, and then they maybe sell it for a bigger, for a much higher amount, right? So I can kind of see that being a cool one. I like Pure Soul. I think that's another, like, I don't know, for the right price, right? It's like not going to get $1 million for that, but there's enough of these like coaches making a ton of money, which is like, you always scratch your head like, what? How are you making that much money?
Oh yeah. Well, and that's what I think is neat about a name like puresoul.com is that, that's one that could be, even when you think about, okay, who's your target, right? I love a name like that because, and much more than a name like Vintage Bike. And when you look at Vintage Bike, I think, you're looking for a company that's already calling themselves Vintage Bicycle or Vintage Bike or Vintage E-Bike, Vintage Electric Bikes, whatever, you're going from the, but it's not the plural. This is the singular. So you're really looking for somebody who's trying to, this is more about their brand than trying to sell an e-commerce product, right? And they're obviously boxed in on that one. But a name like Pure Soul, I think is pretty badass because then that's a name that it's like, okay, that could be a clothing company, that could be a record company, that could be, I mean, that could be a self-help guru. That could
make it great.
That could literally be, there's a religious slant to that. You know what I'm saying? That you could, that's a, there's a whole lot of different things that can be done with a name like that. That to me, and it's funny that you mentioned that one is probably my favorite out of all the ones that are on this list. And because it's like, okay, cool. Like for you guys now, if you were given that name as part of a name that we're going to go chase down, it's like, you're like, oh, cool. I've got like huge wide net that I can cast over that one, So
yeah.
I think Skin Plus
I think
is I was going to say, I think Skin Plus is also a pretty good one. I can't, like, every freaking podcast ad that I've had for the last 2 months is all skin care routine products. All these, bigger social media influencers are all advertising for, either their own personal brand or some other like skin products and skincare routines and stuff. So that's I think that's a pretty interesting one on there as well.
Yeah. Any others that you like, or is there anything on here that you're like, this comes across my desk and I'm telling Drew, hey, dude, let's.
Is renovations spelled right? Quality renovations?
I think so.
But I like that one. I mean, renovations is big business, right? I mean, you could easily. Once again, it's like, who's going to buy it? I don't know. There's enough people out there that are starting blogs up. I mean, as the economy gets tougher, more people are going to be looking for these type of domains. Would they spend $5,000 on it? You got to buy it right. Maybe $7,000. Yeah. Could you? I mean, the amount of renovation companies is massive. So you could, do the outbound.
HGTV's got everybody thinking they can do, except, it's a problem where it's really a scourge, and a problem is that it makes my wife think that she can do all these projects. You know what I'm saying? And then that turns into we can do all these projects. You know what I'm saying? And then it turns into we should have hired somebody to do this project. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm with you, and I think that's also a good point too, which is like, you know, identifying like, hey, okay, what are the buyer types that are going to kind of be, you know, open and available for this particular name? What's that type of budget going to do? And then based on the budget, it's like, all right, now you're almost like, then divide that by 10 or by 5 to get to what do I need to buy this name for so that I can ultimately achieve a 10, 20x or something like that to make it all worth the, you know, the time that it's going to take and, you know, and all the other stuff. So
the first buyer type's a hobbyist. They're up night drinking beer. You know, they're like, I hate my job, right? Then they buy it. It's a passion. They don't do anything with it. The next buyer type is that solo entrepreneur / local. And you think about it, right? How many people, they start off as the junior renovation guy, then they branch off and do their own business, right? So I mean, it's like this continual new blood coming in, these solo entrepreneurs coming in that you know, looking for a new name. Obviously, there's a lot of branding based on their name, but then, you know, something like that, if you price it right, easy path to victory, you know, with like a buy it now price. I would think there's room to sell that. The 7, you know, look at Mike Mann's pricing. I mean, he does a great job, I think, with these type of domains.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny. Whenever I see him promoting the sales that he makes, you know, and you know, and you're like, man, he got that for that, you know, and but I think he does a good job of tapping into, you know, names that have brandable value. He's been doing this long enough, so he understands hey, this is a name somebody's willing to spend 20 grand on. You know, it's
his price buckets are good. His price buckets are good. He kind of
Well, and when we went through our pricing recently, you know, it was trying to and bucketing. We talked Josh Reason's a guy that, you know, on this show who talks about, you know, how you price domains because he sells a lot of names via buy it now. And you know, the key is to just figure out like, and this goes back to the last Sherpa short we did, which was talking about how do you get maximum value for your domain without leaving money on the table, right? And, you know, one of the things we do from a buy it now perspective is really just try to figure out the bucket, right? Because if a name is, it's like, okay, well, this name is a $5,000 name. This name is not a $10,000 name, right? So it's like, you know, okay, so, you know, it's kind of capped in that 5K range. You know, and we, you know, and as you go up the ladder, you realize too, it's a similar situation where this name is 25K name. We're never going to get 50,000 for it. You know, but if you listed it for sale at 17, you might be missing out on 10 grand that you might get. You know what I mean? So it's like trying to find that right bucket, sort of what is the max value, and you sort of start there, which is what is the max value that I think this name could get realistically sold in the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, right? And then from there, you can always you know, like you can always cut the price. But, you know, that has proven to be helpful for us, especially when you got thousands of names that you've got to price. I don't know. I recently saw that for Mike, he, you know, manually repriced his 200,000. I don't even know how you do that, dude. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
just you need like a bunch down of by the beats. Yeah,
you need a bunch of.
But yeah, it is interesting because there was a domain there was 2 domains we were going after this one company recently, and one we took down, and then the other one, you know, the subpar domain, he wanted more than like the better domain, and it's like, man, what are you thinking? Like,
yeah.
Telling you, like, you're priced it too high. If you don't price it right in this, you know, you just have to have some kind of equation in there, and otherwise you pass on the perfect offer, the perfect buyer for your domain. So
yeah, that's a fair point. All right, well, cool. So all right, well, we covered a lot of ground, guys. This is great. Any names on the list? Last thing, anything that you would avoid that you think, hey, this name isn't worth even $500 because trying to find a buyer for something like this, I'm just not seeing.
I mean, temporary office. I'm just
I was gonna say that could be a tough one.
You know, especially showing a $20,000 whatever Esteban appraisal. Obviously, you take the Esteban appraisals with a grain of salt, but you know, it is another data point to allow you to sort and kind of put some context around a name. But yeah, I think I'm with you. Temporary office like .com, like that's tough to brand with, right? So you're never going to brand your company, hey, welcome to temporary office. And even if that is kind of what you sell, which is sort of like a WeWork, you know, type of space or some things like that, it's almost like, you know, there's already things happening for that. You're not going to brand your company that, and I don't know if you know. Maybe
I've talked to everyone in that industry, and they're not buying that.
Well, and that's good perspective. That's what I'm saying. That's a perspective I want. You know, that's what I love.
Yeah, I'm telling you right now, they're not like the big boys, Regis and these other players. They're not buying it. They passed on some amazing domains back in the day. Yeah. So that's a tough, if you buy it right, maybe 2,000, 3,000, and then maybe you put it up higher. I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear Drew's perspective. I know from a broker's standpoint, reaching out, tough.
Yeah, no, all good. All right, cool. Well, that's good feedback, man. And that's why I asked the question. So thank you. Yeah. And so, all right, well, good stuff. Listen, I think I think we even went over the time that we thought. So this will end up being even bit of a meatier show than we thought, which is great. So all good. So I appreciate you guys taking the time, sharing your expertise, your thoughts, your knowledge on the show. It means a lot. And to the audience, thank you guys for tuning in. You have any questions or any follow-up on any of the stuff that we talked about? We're not hard to find. Hit us up on Twitter. Go to the DomainSherpa Twitter, MediaOptions. You can find Chris. You can find Matthew, LinkedIn. I mean, literally, check out the books. So where do they go for the book at the moment? What's the best?
So you can go to DomainNameBrokerSecrets.com. And it'll redirect to my site, but I want to get it back up on MediaOptions. And I'll say, listen, if you found value in this, one thing you can do for me is just share the book up, share it up, Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a ton of value and knowledge in there. So it's definitely worth reading if you're trying to sell domain names or, there's a lot of value in there. But yeah, and in fact, possibly by the time the show goes live, we'll probably have a link to the book back up on the website. So go to the About Us page on the MediaOptions.com site. We'll also put a link on the DomainSherpa site on the actual page for this episode. And we got to do a little bit better with that in general. But we'll get on the ball. We got some things coming in the redesign of the DomainSherpa site, which will happen soon. But soon being a relative term, but it will happen. And, but otherwise all good. So to the audience, like I said, if you want to hit us up, question, comments, good, bad, ugly, please do it. We're not hard to find. Otherwise, thank you for tuning in. Without you, there is no us. We're not here without you guys tuning in. We appreciate it. We do see the comments. And, I got a couple of really nice positive comments over the last week or so, just, LinkedIn and otherwise. And just to let y'all know, I really appreciate that. When people take a minute, I'm not saying, hey, y'all need to do it. I'm just saying that for the few folks who do reach out unsolicited and just say, hey, love what you guys do, we very much appreciate that. And, glad that we can help y'all out. Hopefully you'll find value in some of the content we provide. So with that, we'll keep it moving. Thank you guys. And we'll see you next time here on Domain Sherpa, where all roads lead to domains. Peace out, everybody.
Peace.